Ancient traditions describe this in the language of their time. Not only do they say that we are connected to the world around us, just the way Western science is now discovering, they invite us one step further, and they say, here's how you apply it in your life. They left us very, very clear instructions saying this is the way you use this power, this inner technology within you to bring about change.
Well, welcome to Beyond Belief. I'm George Norrie, and before I introduce our special guest for this program, special thanks to all of you who continue to watch and support us on beyondbelief.com. It is one of the world's fastest growing internet-based television programs, and it only has happened because of you. Our special guest, Greg Bowden, who is an author, scientist, researcher, explorer, and an expert, of course, in human origin. One of his latest works, The God Code. There's something very special about that. Greg, welcome back to Beyond
George,
Belief.
it's an honor to be here, and I'm really excited to talk about this material.
I love you. I've always loved your work. I mean, it's just thought-provoking. How did this all start for you? Let's go back to the beginning.
You want to go back to the beginning? We're filming in Denver, Colorado, and it began right here in Denver, Colorado, or in the Rocky Mountain area. I was, a lot of our viewers don't know this, behind the scenes, I worked in the defense industry during the last years of the Cold War, a very frightening time. And
indeed,
in the history of our world, when the two superpowers at the time did the unthinkable and actually created, they spent the energy, the manpower, the resources, the technology to create the weapons to microwave the Earth many times over in the event that a nuclear war ever occurred. It was during that time, George, if you can imagine, I found myself working behind the scenes writing software for the missile program, supporting that effort by day. And by night, ever since I was young, I've been a scholar of some of our most ancient and cherished spiritual traditions and some of the most mysterious texts of our past. And I have felt for a very long time, George, that if we knew where to look in the past, that we would find the key and perhaps a message from our ancestors that would help us to transcend the differences that have led to the great wars of the 20th and now the 21st century, and at that time, the kind of war that I was supporting. So it was during that time that I began a search and a research of comparative traditions, helping us to understand our origins. Because my thinking was, if we could find a way to show beyond any reasonable doubt, beyond the superficial, outward demonstrations, that we are actually we are one. And for some people, it's a very New Age sounding hope or wish, but I think there's a lot of power in showing that unification is possible, helping us to transcend those differences. So my journey began to take me back into older and older and older texts, cutting through the red tape. And
we're almost obsessed with it.
And the religions, well, I would say passionate. I prefer passion over obsession. My wife would probably say I was obsessed.
Yeah.
So, because the clues, every time I would find a clue, George, and I think, okay, maybe this is it, and then it's not going to go anywhere else, it would open the door to something else, and open the door to something else. And that led me from the textbooks onto a series of journeys. My first journey was in Egypt in 1986. And what I found in Egypt on the temple walls led me into the highlands of the Andes Mountains of southern Peru, which directed me right into the Tibetan plateau and the temples and the monasteries in Tibet. As a scientist, my thinking is, if I'll speak about myself personally, if I can find the information least disturbed by the modern world, that's where it will be most intact. And to go to those places, you've got to make the effort to get there. They're some of the most magnificent, beautiful, remote, isolated, pristine places remaining on the world. Did I say remote, by the way? Because they are. But it's in the monasteries, in the nunneries, where many of these texts are preserved, and they've been largely forgotten.
Truly amazing texts.
Well, they are. So as I began my search, my thinking was, if we could really pin down our origins, the science, the best science of the 21st century is now overturning so many of Darwin's ideas. And by the way, Darwin was open to that. He was willing for his ideas to fall. He viewed them as stepping stones toward greater understandings. So Darwin was okay with that. And I began to see a connection in the texts that was not accounted for in the theories of evolution. And it is a connection that is very controversial today. Now, Darwin didn't have access to the tools and the technology. He certainly didn't have the DNA databases
Of course,
that
he
we
didn't have
have
anything.
today. So this is where I began. Part of my job in software development was in writing pattern recognition software, and I've searched patterns ever since I was a kid.
So you applied it to this.
Sure, it comes very naturally for me. I used to look at flashing patterns on blinking lights on Christmas trees,
Yeah.
and I mean you see them everywhere. So I thought, if there are patterns in nature, and we are nature, they should show up in our DNA. And it was in the 80s when the DNA databases, we could actually begin to access them without being part of the research projects. So to make a long story really brief, what I found was in one of the most obscure and ancient of the texts, a book called the Sefer Yetzirah.
What is that?
It is a Hebrew text that has only been translated a couple of times of a couple of authors into English. It's so mysterious, George, that very few scholars even want to talk about it because they don't know what to say about it. It's a brief text. It's only about 2,000 lines.
All right.
And it is written as if an observer were present the day that the Creator created humankind, step by step. However, it's written in a language that doesn't make a lot of sense to us
Is it like
today.
Genesis or totally different?
It's very different from Genesis. I think Genesis probably partially derived from this text, the Sefer Yetzirah, which is the book of creation. It literally translates to the book of creation. So it was as if someone were watching the Creator actually create the first person.
Doing what he did.
Doing what he did, but it is not written scientifically. The bottom line to what the text is saying is that through language, humankind was created. And that doesn't make a lot of sense.
Explain that.
If you take it literally. But as I began to follow the instructions as the author created them in this text, and this, George, this is the power of transcending the boundaries between science and spirituality. Because if a scientist only looked at the elements of life, you'd never make this discovery. If you only look at the spiritual text, you would never make this discovery. But it's by blending the two together and allowing them to tell the story. So we today in modern science, we talk about life as the result of elements, and we describe elements through word and through number. So we have the periodic table, for example. Hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, carbon makes up the DNA of our bodies. Those are the words. And for every one of those words, there are a lot of numbers that may be applied. There are 17 different numeric parameters that go with each of those. So put that aside. When you go back into the ancient text in the Sefer Yetzirah specifically, they did exactly the same thing. They talked about the power of the letters of very specific alphabets. Now, it doesn't make a lot of sense to modern scholars until we begin to understand that every ancient alphabet, bar none, that I have found so far, has always from day one with each letter had a mysterious number associated with the letters. We don't know where the numbers came from. They never change.
Code?
It's a unique numeric code. The study of that code is called gematria, and it was actually formalized. The laws, 32 laws of gematria, were formed in the 2nd century. They were formalized in the 2nd century. And the only way gematria works is you cannot deviate from these laws. There are specific laws that apply to the numbers. So our ancestors were also talking about life using words and numbers. So they had the letters of the alphabets and this mysterious number. We're using the periodic table. We've got a whole bunch of numbers.
Right.
My job was to find out which of those numbers equates to the numbers in the ancient alphabets. And if I could do that, my thinking was, it would be possible to look at human DNA, carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, and different combinations of that, and substitute the ancient letters for the numbers based upon this correlation. This, in retrospect, it was simple, but not knowing that, it took years. It took me 12 years.
And did you break it?
To find what we now know is that the atomic mass of the elements, the numbers of the atomic mass, are the numbers that equate to the mysterious letters in the ancient alphabets. What that means is when you look at human DNA, or the DNA of any life, it is made of hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, carbon, and using gematria, the numbers that equate to those become 1, 5, 6, and 3. 3 is with the carbon. And when you then take a table, one of the ancient tables, and you're able to correlate those numbers with the letters, what we find, George, is that the human DNA is our genome is built in layers. And at the top layer, it's like every book has an introduction. The introduction in every cell of every form of life, carbon-based DNA, the introduction is the same. And the first translation literally reads, literal, God eternal within the body. God eternal within the body. And God that is depicted in the DNA is actually spelled the way that the name of God was spelled in the ancient text before it was removed 6,800 times. In the Torah, for example, the sacred name of God is believed to be so sacred it cannot be written in its entirety.
Why put it in a code?
You know, this was, so first as a scientist, what I have to say is this. People say, why is the code there?
Yeah.
And I say, I don't know. All I know is that when I followed the instructions in a 3,000-year-old text and I applied it to the periodic table, this is what we have. Yeah. Next question, is it a coincidence? So
there are no coincidences.
I had a statistician run the numbers for me, and the odds of this happening by chance are 1 to 234,256.
Yeah.
234,256 to 1 are the or 0.00041%.
Right.
Those are the odds that it's just
random.
Just random. Now, those aren't astronomical odds. I thought it might be like 1 to a bajillion, you know. But when you take into account,
they're still high.
Not only is the language there, but when you take into account what the words say, that those words actually have meaning, God eternal within the body.
And they all say that.
The first letter in all human DNA, if you can look at what's called the genetic code, CTAG, every one of those is made up of combinations of carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen. Right. And they are arranged, I don't want to be really technical when I talk about this, but they're arranged different numbers of carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen atoms. So within each of the DNA bases that make our DNA as it is, there are different combinations of CTAG that break down to different combinations of God eternal within the body. And the God within our cells, within our DNA, is literally the same spelling of the God that was taken from those texts. Now here's the beauty, I just have to say this.
All right.
My first fear was I found it in the Hebrew language, and I said, does that mean, could it actually be divisive if it only is found in one language? And when the research went to its fruition, what we found is it is in Hebrew and Aramaic and Sanskrit, 3 of the root languages.
The same thing.
Exactly the same thing. So in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Sanskrit, the code for those letters translates precisely the same in the human DNA. That's the first layer.
In your opinion, that slogan, God eternal, is in the body. What did that mean?
What it tells me is because the odds of that happening by chance are
astronomical,
are steep, it tells me there's an intentionality. Now, who or what, I don't know the answer to that, but it tells me that that the DNA, the way it's formed, it is intentional. And then I began to think, in our modern world, we're creators, we're artists. Whenever we create something that we're proud of, when we're finished, what's the last thing we do when we finish it, George? You tell me, what is the last thing we do with something? We finish a painting, and what's the last thing we do when we finish that painting?
You sign it.
We put our name on it. If there's an intentionality underlying life itself and human life specifically, it would make tremendous sense to me that who or whatever is responsible would somehow have left a sign.
Is it God's signature?
I believe that however we define that, whatever we believe that creator is. My next question is, why not put it into a text or into a temple wall? And then my thinking was, why place that signature into something that can crumble over a few thousand years, like a temple wall, or into the pages of a book that can be destroyed? Why not put it in the creation itself? And as long as the creation exists, the message exists as well. I published this in 2004, even though the research was incomplete. It was complete to that point, and I wanted to share this with the world. 2007, Japanese scientists released a report, peer-reviewed report, on the feasibility of storing data in DNA for thousands of years. And what they were looking at is bacteria. They were looking at storing information in bacteria and placing the bacteria in nuclear waste dumps, for example.
And letting it sit there.
And letting it sit there because the papers might disintegrate or something else might happen.
Yeah.
But if they could do it. So 2007 was the first time they successfully implanted a message into the DNA of a bacteria. And they used bacteria because...
Hoping that someone in the future one day would use it?
Well, this was a test.
Yeah.
They used the bacteria because they have a short lifespan, so they could see how many generations, for bacteria, the generations may be just a few days. So the code they put into the DNA, it was...
Don't say it was the same thing.
No, it was Einstein's theory of relativity. It was E equals mc squared in the year 1905. They encoded that into the DNA. They allowed the DNA to replicate for 25 generations.
With that code.
With the code. They pulled the code right out, completely intact. So what they're now demonstrating purely in the scientific realm is the feasibility of storing literal information in the genome, in the DNA, and it remains intact for as long as the organism remains intact.
Well, here's the puzzling part. If you put a code in there, you're doing it for one of several reasons. One, you're hiding it, or two, you're trying to pass information on to some future generation. So let's assume that that's what that is.
Yeah.
When we extract it and we get that code, what do we do with it? What's it mean?
I think it depends on what the code says. Now we know, and the work is progressing from this point. And in 2015, another layer will have been completely decoded, and hopefully you and I can have this conversation, and I'll share what we find next. The point is that there is a message encoded into the DNA of all human life that tells us beyond any reasonable doubt that the differences that divide us now are superficial differences, and that we have a common origin, a common ancestry. I was doing a conference in the D.C. area, and I made the statement, and I said, I would love to get my hands on some DNA from life that's not from this world, and if it's carbon-based life, and if the message is the same, then we know that we have a common
goal.
A common goal. And
wouldn't that be exciting?
Well, there's a man that came forward and said, when you're ready for that DNA, let me know.
He's got it?
I don't know.
Maybe from some Martian meteorite, right?
Know. There's, we don't know. We don't know. But
you're going to take him up on it?
I'm going to call him from your cell phone number, George, not from my cell phone number.
We'll block your number.
I'm not ready for that yet. When we were developing the algorithms, and they're very complex algorithms now to help look at the DNA in new ways. So here we are, we come full circle. We are at this crisis point in civilization when we're facing more crises of such great
than
magnitude
ever before, that I can remember.
Based on our division, on our separation. And if there is some way that we could bring forward in a really powerful, meaningful way, something that casts an entire new light on us as a family, and what that family means, I think it would give us a reason to look at things differently. It doesn't mean it would force us to, it means it would give us a scientific reason to look at one another and think of ourselves very differently. I know for myself, once I found this code, I felt differently about myself, knowing that within every cell of my body, God eternal, it's YHVG, are the Hebrew letters. YH, Yah, is actually one of the forms of the name of God that we find in the Torah that was removed over 6,800 times.
Did it baffle you as to who put the code there?
I've sensed that there's an intentionality.
From?
Regarding us. And when we go to look now at Darwin's idea of evolution, 2,000 years ago, we appeared on this earth. We don't know where we came from and what made us different from so many of the other forms of life was human chromosome number 2, the largest that had been fused with 2 telomere to telomere fusions. Geneticists acknowledge the fusion. They say, we can't say how it happened.
But they know it happened.
And it did not happen under natural circumstance. They said this would not happen in nature. Something has forced this chromosome, or this telomere to telomere fusion between these 2 chromosomes. So I think what we're getting, George, is we've had a sense, so many people, that there's much more to us than evolution has led us to believe. It doesn't mean that evolution didn't occur. As a scientist, I can say it did, to a point. But there's a point where evolution does not explain our existence and cannot account for what we find. And I think this study, this kind of work, where we're crossing the traditional boundaries between science and spirituality. A scholar studying the text would never find this.
A scientist
looking at the elements in the periodic table, or a geneticist would never find it, because they're compartmentalized.
You need a combination.
But the world doesn't work that way. So we are gifting ourselves the ability to see the world as it is through what the world is sharing with us, if we're open enough. But the science has to be rigid. It has to be based upon what science is telling us. So the periodic table describes the elements that make the DNA in our bodies. There's a mathematic link between that and the letters of the ancient alphabets. How that link got there, who put it there, I have no idea.
As I was flying here, Greg, from Los Angeles to Denver, and I'm looking around the plane, and there's all these people sitting on the plane, and it just dawns on me, and I do this a lot, every one of them is an individual. They've got their own little situation, their problems, their happiness, their families, every one of them. But the question I kept asking myself as I looked at this entire plane full of people, why? What's the reason? What are they here for? Some had briefcases, some had purses, some had tablets. Who are they? What are they? I still can't get that answer. You, of course, have brought up a series of 6 questions in one of our previous shows that asks those questions too. But will we ever get that answer? Why are we here?
I think we will have the answer, George. The question is, will we be willing to accept what the answer says to us?
Is it frightening?
I don't think it's frightening. We've asked science to tell us who we are.
And they don't tell us.
Well, science, pure science, is now revealing the information. It's not being accepted in the mainstream. So the textbooks in the classrooms are not accepting what the science is telling us.
What is it telling us?
For example, evolution. We'll just take evolution because that's on a lot of people's minds right now. In a public classroom, a teacher can only teach the curricula that's been approved by a school board.
Right.
All right. The school
board can't deviate from that. If
the school board does not accept, even though it's peer-reviewed science, if the school board does not accept that, it cannot be taught. So we're teaching our young people. Or that teacher
gets fired.
Or the teacher gets fired. Yeah. We're teaching our young people the story of separation that has led to so many of the crises that we're seeing. It makes us feel separate from ourselves, from one another. And I've asked professors and friends of mine, I said, why can't you share this in the classroom? Why can't you share the science?
And they're petrified to share this, aren't they?
Before money, ego, power, and habit.
Yeah.
And one of the professors, he said, do you know, as a male, he said, do you know what that would mean to my 40-year career if I had to stand in front of a classroom and say everything I've taught until this point is no longer true? So to him, it would say he was a failure. What I said to him, I said it would be a beautiful demonstration of the power of science and your ability to constantly update what science is telling us about our world. He said, do you know how much money it would cost to change the textbooks? And I said, well, look how much money we spend on the war, so, why not? Habit. He said, it is a habit to teach this. Now, it is changing, and it's changing slowly, George. And this is only one place. Evolution is only one place, but it's the place that's directly relevant to the God code.
But will we get that answer, Greg? Why are we here?
I think we will find the evidence of the circumstances, the actual reason, I think, is something that we have to find for ourselves. I think we're
individually.
I think that's what we're going to find. A good friend of mine was watching the movie The Matrix. I know a lot of our
Great
viewers have
movie.
seen
I
it.
love it.
Well,
I've cited that on the radio show a lot.
I love it as well. It's one that I have by the TV, and when I'm writing into the wee hours of the morning, there's 2 movies. I don't watch them all the way through, but
Contact and Matrix.
How'd you know that?
Because it's the same with me.
And I don't watch them all the way through, but I like the part where they solve the codes, because I think there's a lot to that. And where does that come from anyway? So my friend said, "You think it's science fiction?" He said, "Matrix is actually a documentary about us and the way things work in the world." So it may be that by working backward through the code, we do arrive at the doorstep of an architect at some point.
If you could get an answer to one question, what would that question be?
I think it's the question we're asking right now. Why us? Why here? Why now? There's another branch of work that this follows up on, and it is the study of whether or not we are living in a simulation or a virtual reality. And there is a degree course in one of the large Eastern universities in philosophy that you can take, and the title of the course is "Are We Living a Simulation?" And to make a long story very brief, what they did was they took a very complex computer algorithm, plugged in all kinds of variables about human population and trajectories and economies and families and religious beliefs, all about life. And the bottom line is there's over a 93% chance that we are living a simulation. Now, if you step into a simulation, a virtual environment in Disneyland, you can do that today and not even really know that that's where you are. And we've only had computers about 60 years. If you take the archaeology that's showing the existence of advanced technological civilizations thousands of years, where would we be if we had thousands of years of computer science to build that kind of simulation? And the question comes, why would we do this? And the answer for me is that every simulation is built to help the people in the simulation become very well adapted to somewhere that they're going to be when the simulation no longer exists. The simulation is a safe place to make mistakes and learn that power if we are in fact on Earth living a simulation. And our most cherished traditions tell us that we're on our way somewhere else. This isn't it, this is an illusion, this is temporary. In general they say that. Then I think we have to look at what those traditions are telling us, and they're teaching us about our relationship to reality, to quantum reality, to emotions and the emotions of the heart, to create and heal in our bodies and the world around us. And if we master those, maybe that's what this simulation is all about. God eternal within the body may be the architect that has helped to create this simulation.
Do you ever get frustrated that we don't have the answers yet?
I don't, George. I don't, because what it tells me is, and what I've come to understand, is that when we are truly ready for that information, it's right there. Sometimes, this is a perfect example. This has been around, for 200,000 years. It's only when
to be discovered, though, by those who look.
Or when our technology reaches the point that it gives us the tools to take a peek.
It's almost like that code we sent out on one of the Viking craft,
I know.
right? Which Stephen Hawking said, don't do, because he's afraid that they'll come here and he's not so sure they're very benevolent.
Yeah, it was interesting. I actually talk about that code in the book, The God Code. What is it that we said? Who did we write it to?
And who finds it?
And how would it be interpreted?
Yeah.
So it makes perfect sense to me. If we are the product of an intentional creation, that the Creator, who or whatever that is, would somehow leave a mark, letting us know when we have the ability to find that.
It is brilliant.
And I can't think of a more honoring way to honor who or what that Creator is than to take that code, read it, and maybe communicate back the other way. And I think we are on our way to doing that.
I think so too. Greg, thanks for being on Beyond
George,
Belief.
thank you for
You're so enlightening. You really are. You bring us just a different perspective to just about everything we've talked about over the years. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you. Thank you for today.
As we've talked, do we get that answer? Who are we? Why are we here? Sometimes I wonder, maybe we won't get that answer, but we'll continue striving for it. And I think that'll make us a better person. I'm George Norrie, and this is Beyond Belief.